History is stranger than fiction. From bizarre laws to horrifying experiments, the past is filled with events so shocking, you'd think they were made up. Today, we're uncovering 10 of the most unbelievable historical events, each stranger than the last and almost impossible to believe actually happened. Before we begin, I invite you to drop in the comments where you're watching from, which story was your favorite, and subscribe to the channel if you want to follow us on our journey to uncovering history's most bizarre events. 1. The Dancing Plague of 1518, Strasbourg, France. In July 1518, the streets of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, were gripped by a bizarre and terrifying phenomenon that has baffled historians for centuries. It began with a single woman, Frau Trophia, who suddenly started dancing uncontrollably in the city's marketplace. She moved with frenzied energy, unable to stop, as sweat poured down her face under the summer sun. Within days, dozens more joined her, caught in the same inexplicable compulsion. People danced for hours on end, some until they collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Contemporary accounts describe scenes of chaos and desperation, dancers screaming, writhing, and falling to the ground, while onlookers were both horrified and powerless to intervene. Some participants reportedly died from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer fatigue. Local authorities and physicians were perplexed and increasingly desperate. Incredibly, one of the cures prescribed was more dancing, intended to work off the feverish mania, but this only worsened the epidemic. At its height, estimates suggest anywhere from 50 to 400 people may have perished during this harrowing event. Historians and psychologists today propose several possible explanations, including mass psychogenic illness, extreme stress, malnutrition, or superstition-fueled hysteria. Yet no single cause has ever been definitively proven, leaving the episode shrouded in mystery. The Dancing Plague of Strasbourg endures as one of history's most haunting examples of mass hysteria, a vivid reminder of how fear, stress, and social contagion can seize entire communities in ways that defy logic or reason. From frenzied dancing, let's move to the grotesque extremes of medieval politics. 2. The Cadaver Synod of 897, Rome, Italy. In the year 897, the papacy descended into one of the most grotesque spectacles in church history. Pope Stephen VI, driven by political rivalries and the bitter factional struggles that plagued medieval Rome, ordered the body of his predecessor, Pope Molasses, to be exhumed from its tomb. Molasses had been dead for nearly 9 months, his corpse badly decayed, yet Stephen demanded that he face a formal trial for alleged crimes committed during his papacy. In a surreal and macabre scene later called the Cadaver Synod, Molasses' rotting body was dressed in papal vestments and seated upon a throne in the Lateran Basilica. Unable to speak for himself, a terrified deacon was appointed to act as his defender, forced to answer accusations on behalf of the corpse. The trial was a farce. Stephen VI, shouting and gesturing at the lifeless figure, accused Molasses of violating canon law and unlawfully ascending to the papal office. Predictably, the verdict was guilty. The corpse was stripped of its sacred garments, the blessing fingers on its right hand were severed, and finally the body was dragged through the streets of Rome and cast into the waters of the Tiber River. The gruesome spectacle horrified the Roman people. Instead of consolidating Stephen's authority, the synod stoked outrage and deepened instability. Within a year, Stephen VI himself was deposed, thrown into prison, and strangled to death, another victim of the same ruthless power struggles he had tried to dominate. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the most chilling episodes in church history, a vivid reminder of how far medieval leaders were willing to go in their quest for power, putting even the dead on trial in their desperate battles for legitimacy. Politics can be horrifying, but sometimes nature itself creates absurd, deadly spectacles. 3. The Great Emu War of 1932, Western Australia. In the early 1930s, farmers in Western Australia faced an unlikely but devastating enemy: emus. After World War I, returning soldiers had been encouraged to settle and farm wheat in the region. But in 1932, thousands of emus, large, flightless birds standing nearly 2 meters tall, migrated inland in search of food and water. They descended on farmland in massive flocks, trampling fences and devouring crops, leaving the struggling farmers desperate for help. The Australian government decided to act with military precision. In November 1932, soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns were dispatched to the countryside under the command of Major G.P.W. Meredith. The mission seemed simple: eliminate the birds and protect the crops. Farmers expected the operation to be quick and decisive. It was anything but. The emus proved astonishingly resilient. Fast, agile, and capable of sprinting at speeds over 30 miles per hour, they scattered into small groups at the first sound of gunfire, making them almost impossible to target effectively. Attempts to ambush the flocks often ended in frustration, with soldiers firing hundreds of rounds and felling only a handful of birds. In one engagement, a gun jammed after killing just a few emus, while the rest disappeared into the scrub. After weeks of futile attempts, the soldiers withdrew. By the time the operation ended, only a few hundred emus had been killed, while tens of thousands remained to continue raiding crops. Newspapers mocked the campaign as the Great Emu War, a humiliating episode in which one of the world's most powerful militaries had been outwitted by a flock of birds. The emus, meanwhile, carried on largely unbothered, their survival turning the failed campaign into one of history's most bizarre military blunders, a reminder that nature does not always yield to human weapons or authority. If giant birds can cause chaos, consider this next act of Cold War ingenuity. For Operation Paul Bunyan, 1976, Korean DMZ. On August 18, 1976, a seemingly ordinary tree in the Korean demilitarized zone triggered one of the most surreal confrontations of the Cold War. The tree, a tall poplar standing near the Bridge of No Return, obstructed the line of sight between United Nations command checkpoints, making it difficult for U.S. and South Korean personnel to monitor the area. When American officers attempted to trim its branches, they were confronted by North Korean soldiers. What began as routine maintenance escalated with shocking speed. Armed North Korean troops attacked with clubs and axes, brutally killing 2 U.S. Army officers, Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett, and injuring several others. The incident horrified Washington and Seoul, sparking a demand for an unmistakable show of strength. The response was Operation Paul Bunyan, one of the most heavily armed tree-cutting missions in history. 3 days later, on August 21, American and South Korean forces returned to the poplar. Engineers arrived with chainsaws, but they were far from alone. They were guarded by a massive escort, infantry units, armored vehicles, and artillery positioned across the DMZ. Overhead, B-52 bombers, fighter jets, and attack helicopters circled, while an aircraft carrier strike group waited offshore. The North Koreans, faced with overwhelming force, did not intervene. Under the watchful eyes of both sides, the poplar tree was swiftly cut down to a stump, the chainsaws completing what had begun days earlier in bloodshed. Though no further shots were fired, the axe murder incident and its bizarre resolution became a chilling example of Cold War tension. That a single tree could draw the attention of 2 nuclear-armed powers and nearly spark a wider conflict remains one of the strangest episodes of military escalation in modern history. From absurd military maneuvers to human resilience under extreme conditions. 5. Phineas Gage's brain accident, 1848, USA. On September 13, 1848, a routine day of railroad construction in Vermont turned into one of the most remarkable medical cases in history. A young foreman named Phineas Gage was using a tamping iron, a 3.5-foot long iron rod weighing over 13 pounds, to pack explosive powder into rock. In a fateful moment, a spark ignited the powder prematurely. The blast drove the rod upward with unimaginable force. It entered beneath Gage's left cheekbone, passed behind his eye, and exited through the top of his skull, landing some 80 feet away. To the astonishment of his fellow workers, Gage not only survived but remained conscious, reportedly speaking moments after the accident and even walking to a cart that carried him for treatment. Doctors soon realized, however, that survival came at a terrible cost. The iron rod had destroyed much of his frontal lobe, an area of the brain critical for decision-making, social behavior, and personality. Though Gage recovered physically, his friends and family insisted he was no longer the same man. Once responsible, disciplined, and capable of leadership, he became impulsive, profane, unreliable, and prone to erratic behavior. His case quickly drew the attention of physicians and scientists around the world. For the first time, there was concrete evidence linking specific brain structures to aspects of personality and behavior. Gage lived for another 12 years, traveling and even working for a time, but he was forever marked by the accident that had redefined both his life and the study of the human brain. Today, Phineas Gage is remembered not only as a man who improbably survived a devastating injury, but as a turning point in neuroscience, the moment when the mysteries of the mind began to be understood as rooted in the physical structures of the brain. Human survival can be extraordinary, but some deaths were far less fortunate. 6. The Poisoned Umbrella Assassination, 1978, London, UK. On September 7, 1978, one of the most infamous assassinations of the Cold War took place on the streets of London. Bulgarian dissident Georgi Markov, a journalist and outspoken critic of his country's communist regime, was walking across Waterloo Bridge when he suddenly felt a sharp sting on the back of his thigh. At first, he dismissed it as nothing more than a minor insect bite or a passerby's accident. But within hours, Markov developed a high fever and began to suffer intense pain. Over the next 3 days, his condition worsened rapidly, baffling doctors. On September 11, he was dead. Only later did investigators uncover the chilling truth. Markov had been struck by a tiny metal pellet filled with the deadly poison ricin, injected into his leg through the tip of a modified umbrella. The weapon was a marvel of covert engineering, designed to appear completely ordinary, yet capable of delivering a fatal dose of one of the most lethal toxins known to science. The operation was widely believed to have been carried out by the Bulgarian Secret Service with assistance from the Soviet KGB, both of which viewed Markov's writings as dangerous subversion. Markov's assassination sent shockwaves through the West. It epitomized the paranoia, ingenuity, and brutality of Cold War espionage, where even the most mundane objects, a simple umbrella, could conceal deadly intent. His death became a chilling symbol of the era's shadow war, a reminder that for dissidents, exile offered no true safety from the reach of hostile regimes. From human-designed weapons to the power of the cosmos. 7. The Tunguska Event, 1908, Siberia, Russia. On the morning of June 30, 1908, the remote Siberian wilderness was shaken by one of the most powerful natural explosions in human history. Near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River, a blinding flash lit up the sky, followed by a thunderous shockwave that could be felt hundreds of kilometers away. In an instant, the blast flattened an estimated 2,000 square kilometers of forest, toppling more than 80 million trees in a vast radial pattern. The explosion was so immense that windows shattered and horses panicked over 600 kilometers away, while shockwaves registered on seismic instruments across Eurasia. Eyewitnesses in nearby villages described a fiery object streaking across the sky, followed by an eruption that sent pillars of smoke and fire towering into the atmosphere. For days afterward, skies as far away as London and Stockholm glowed strangely bright at night, allowing people to read outdoors by the eerie light. Scientists now believe the cataclysm was caused by a meteoroid or comet fragment entering Earth's atmosphere at tremendous speed, disintegrating in an airburst several kilometers above the ground. The estimated energy release was staggering, up to 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Yet, due to the remoteness of the Siberian taiga, no confirmed human deaths were ever recorded, though reports of injuries and missing reindeer herders suggest there may have been casualties lost to history. Even today, the Tunguska Event remains one of the largest and most mysterious natural explosions ever documented. Its sheer scale has made it a cornerstone in scientific discussions of planetary defense, a reminder of the destructive potential of even relatively small cosmic visitors from space. If the sky itself can strike terror, human societies have also self-inflicted chaos. 8. The dancing mania of Madagascar, 19th century. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, villages in Madagascar experienced a series of mysterious outbreaks that baffled both locals and outside observers. Much like the infamous dancing plague of Strasbourg, these episodes took the form of mass psychogenic illness, where entire groups of people seemed seized by uncontrollable fits. Witnesses described villagers suddenly convulsing, leaping into the air, shrieking and running in frenzied circles. At times the episodes lasted for hours, and in some cases stretched on for days. The afflicted often appeared to lose awareness of their surroundings, their bodies jerking in spasms as though possessed. Families tried to restrain them, but the strength and violence of the movements frequently led to injuries, collapses, and exhaustion. Anthropologists studying the events later suggested that they were fueled by intense social pressures, widespread superstition, and the power of suggestion. In tightly knit communities where belief in spirits, curses, and ancestral intervention was strong, the sight of one person succumbing to a fit could spread rapidly, triggering a wave of similar behavior among others. What made these outbreaks particularly striking was their persistence. Unlike a single chaotic incident, reports indicated that they recurred in certain regions over time, reinforcing local fears that they were signs of supernatural disturbance. Yet no physical cause was ever discovered. Today, the episodes remain a haunting reminder of the fragile line between mind and body under collective stress, an anthropological puzzle where cultural belief and human psychology fuse to create chaos without a single physical pathogen. From mass hysteria to industrial disaster. 9. The Great Molasses Flood, 1919, Boston, USA. On January 15, 1919, Boston witnessed one of the strangest and deadliest industrial disasters in American history, the Great Molasses Flood. A massive steel tank, hastily constructed by the Purity Distilling Company, held more than 2.3 million gallons of molasses in Boston's North End. Despite repeated warnings from engineers and residents that the tank was unsafe, groaning, leaking, and even oozing sticky brown rivulets, its owners ignored the concerns. At 12:30 in the afternoon, the tank suddenly gave way. The force was so violent that witnesses reported hearing a roar like machine gun fire as rivets shot through the air. Within seconds, a wave of molasses 25 feet high and moving at 35 miles per hour tore through the narrow streets. The sheer density of the syrup gave it the destructive power of a freight train. Wooden buildings splintered and collapsed. Horses, carts, and vehicles were lifted and hurled aside like toys. Dozens of people were swallowed up in the sticky tide, trapped beneath debris or suffocating as they tried to wade through the thick, heavy liquid. The chaos was made worse by the bitter January cold, which thickened the molasses as it cooled, hardening around the victims like quick-drying cement. When the flood finally subsided, 21 people were dead and more than 150 injured. Rescue workers struggled for days to dig survivors and bodies from the hardened mass, their boots and tools sticking with every step. The smell of molasses lingered over the neighborhood for months, and locals swore that on hot summer days decades later, the streets still carried a faint, sweet scent. Investigations revealed what many had already suspected. The tank had been poorly designed, built from substandard steel, and rushed into use without proper safety testing. The disaster prompted stricter building codes and industrial regulations across the United States, leaving behind a sticky, tragic reminder of what happens when warnings go unheeded. Finally, a cautionary tale from human error, amplified by chaos. 10. The Battle of Karansebes, 1788 Austria. In September 1788, during the Austro-Turkish War, the Habsburg army suffered one of the most infamous episodes of friendly fire in history. Near the town of Karansebes, Austrian troops were conducting night maneuvers when confusion, fear, and poor leadership turned into catastrophe. The disaster began when a group of cavalry scouts, searching for signs of the Ottoman enemy, stumbled upon local merchants selling alcohol. The soldiers quickly began drinking, and when infantry units later encountered them, an argument broke out over access to the liquor. In the darkness, tempers flared, shots were fired, and panicked shouts of "Turks! Turks!" rang through the camp. Chaos spread instantly. Entire regiments, unable to see clearly in the night, mistook their own comrades for advancing enemies. Officers shouted orders in multiple languages: German, Hungarian, Italian, and others, adding to the confusion. Soldiers fired blindly into the darkness, cavalry charged, and artillery crews even opened fire on their own lines. By dawn, the scale of the disaster was revealed. Hundreds of Austrian soldiers lay dead or wounded, victims not of an enemy attack but of their own comrades' panic. The Ottoman army itself was nowhere near the battlefield. The tragedy became a notorious case study in the dangers of poor communication, stress, and alcohol in military operations. It remains one of history's strangest and deadliest examples of friendly fire, an army that effectively defeated itself without the enemy lifting a finger. From dancing plagues to deadly umbrellas, from molasses floods to armies destroying themselves, history is filled with events stranger than fiction. And these 10 stories are only the tip of the iceberg, proof that the past can be far more shocking and unbelievable than anything we imagine today.